Hello and good afternoon, and thank you for joining the latest instalment of Sabio CXNow. This week, there's a focus on the human aspects of customer experience. During this week, the sessions have been exploring the ever-changing role of customer-facing teams, from ensuring that customers can speak to a suitably skilled agent when they need, to empowering agents in real time and using voice of customer and employee to put the human at the heart of everything that you do. I'm Richard Beard, and I'm the Operations Director of Insight here at Sabio. In the Insights practice, we manage voice of customer programs, voice of employee programs, and contact center consultancy and benchmarking activities. I'm pleased to say that we put together a really great team of Insights experts for today's panel, with a huge amount of experience in the field. So let's start off by getting the panel introduced. There you all are, perfect. Christine, could you start us off, please?
Hi. I'm Christine Howard. I'm a senior consultant in Sabio Insight, and I specialise in implementation of voice of customer platforms and CX analytics.
Hi, I'm Paul. I'm the Client Success Manager for Sabio Insights, and my role is really integrating CX technology with customer systems.
Hi, I'm Gavin Priest. I'm also a senior consultant in the Sabio Insights. I specialise in voice of employee and have a background in operational learning and development.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Ryan Farnaby, VP of Sales of CX Index, the digital first voice of the customer vendor of Sabio Group.
Superb. Thanks for all bringing your expertise and experience to today's topic, which we've titled The World of Insights Post-COVID. So I suppose the first thing to clarify is that this is really a look at some of the changes since COVID has impacted the contact centre and customer experience world, and in particular looking at some of the impacts through an insights lens. So this is more a discussion around how we've seen customer experience and employee experience programs be impacted and adapt to what is being referred to as the new normal. So look, let's get started. This is a live session today, so we welcome any questions and views throughout the session. Please keep them coming through in the chat panel, and I'll lean on the expertise of the panel to get those questions answered as and when they come through. So there was quite a seismic change in the way that organisations had to change and adapt from 2019 into 2020 and beyond due to COVID. Customer channels changed, with face-to-face being all but removed. The vast majority of contact centres had to move to a remote-first working model, and customer contact volumes became more erratic and in many instances showing a large increase in demand across all channels. In conjunction with the Call Centre Management Association, we ran a benchmarking exercise that looked at some key metrics over a 6-month period. The first took place in 2019, which was before we knew what was coming with COVID, and then we repeated in 2020, which was when the new normal working practices for COVID had been established for the majority of the participants in the benchmarking. What this gave us was some really useful insight that showed us how COVID impacted core contact centre measures. So it'd be a really good place to start today's session by running through some of these measures and what we saw. So let's remind ourselves around the customer contact preference by channel. So the two main traditional channels of phone and email are joined by web chat as the channels with the highest levels of preference. We are seeing an increase in people wanting to self-service, but with social media and SMS as channels still not really registering as a channel of preference. It's also worth considering that almost 2/3 of queries or interactions start online, with only 28% starting their journey on the phone. So for me, this shows a huge opportunity for deflecting contacts away from agent-assisted interactions and onto a self-service or virtual assistant resolution. In terms of participants from the survey, so there's no surprises that all have a voice channel, with almost all having an email channel in place. Where we've seen the biggest shift is in web chat, with a jump from 51% up to 71% of organisations offering web chat as a channel. There have also been increases in all digital channels, with FAQ, forums and virtual assistants all showing an increase in deployments. The big takeout for me from this is that more organisations are taking a more omni-channel approach to customer service, and I can only see this trend continuing. When we then start to look at how the channels of preference have had their metrics impacted due to COVID, it's clear that there have been some challenges. It's worth pointing out when we're talking about these metrics that these are the averages. There are examples where there's been very little impact with some clients, but others where there's been a huge disruption and massive fluctuation in the metrics. So if we take email response time to start off with, we've seen an increase of 6.7 hours up to 40.8 hours for a response to an email. When looking at customer satisfaction linked to email and wait time, we normally start to see a drop off in customer satisfaction scores as soon as you go over anything at 24 hours for email. When looking at the average web tap wait time, that has actually gone up over a minute to 152 seconds on average. Whilst this is a substantial increase in wait time, what was good to see is that web chat concurrency rates didn't increase. So businesses didn't try and deal with the increased volumes or reduced resource by making agents try to service more web chats at the same time. Onto voice, and we've seen big jumps on all service level performance across the board. Average speeds of answer is up over a minute to over 200 seconds now, which has then resulted in abandonment rates jumping up by 4.5%. So in the period that we're looking at here, 14% of calls offered were not being answered. Whilst 80/20, look, that's not a great measure to have in place at contact centres, but the service level of 80% of calls being answered in 20 seconds also slipped, with only 54% of calls being answered within 20 seconds. Moving on to some people measures, and I was actually a little surprised to see that in the middle of a global sickness pandemic, that absence levels actually went down by 5 days on average in the 6 months. That was per agent. In comparison, other sectors compared to contact centres still have a really high level of absence. And it's worth noting that on that measure of 5 days per agent in a 6 month period, some organisations actually did class shielding and self-isolating as absence. So in reality, the absence level actually dropped more and would have been less than 5 days. Team manager ratios increased slightly to an average of 11.3 agents per team leader. We see that anything less than 15 is an acceptable ratio. If you go anything above this, you'll start to see key quality and efficiency measures being impacted. You do obviously need to take into consideration the kind of tasks and roles that team managers have. So who does the quality monitoring, who takes up the HR activity, the scheduling, etc. And then we're looking at training. As expected, with resource stretch, there's been less training given to agents with a drop to 12.8 hours on average in a 6 month period. And in reality, the training that was given would have been the kind of systems-based or process training, and the training that would have been dropped would have been the skills-based agent training, the kind of training that really leads to agent engagement. And onto adherence. So interestingly, adherence levels were not impacted as much as I would have expected. As people were working remotely, not sitting in teams without managers in front of them telling them when to follow their schedule, I would have expected adherence to drop more than the 2.6% that it did, and it now sits on average at 84.9%. If we move on to voice of customer, and look, on the backdrop of the fact that we know there's been service challenges and service level challenges, it shouldn't be a surprise that NPS scores have seen a decline, dropping 6.2 points to an NPS of 42.8 now. It's worth pointing out that 42.8 points as an average is still really high and a great level of customer experience. In terms of the importance of customer experience, a recent survey has shown that 63% of participants stated that they've stopped doing business with a brand due to poor customer experience. And the largest frustration still coming from customer effort related reasons, either through repeat contacts or being passed between agents and departments. Clearly, customer journeys and having a clear contact strategy is also important, with being unable to reach a live person and the accessibility of online information or an online resolution high on the frustration list. It's probably now a good time to get some views of Christine to just talk about voice of customer in a little bit more detail, and in particular some interesting trends when comparing B2B and B2C results.
Thanks, Rich. So those customer service frustrations that people mention will obviously be different by sector and by organisation. But one of the really interesting things that we've noticed during COVID is the difference between B2B and B2C. So on the slide, you can see the average NPS scores for B2B organisations in green and B2C organisations in pink. And that's from the start of 2020 until last month. Now, historically, we know that B2B tends to score lower than B2C, but if you look at those white areas, which represent when the UK national lockdowns happened, we can see a few interesting things starting to emerge. So when we first went into lockdown at the end of March last year, we did see a drop in NPS for B2C organisations, but B2B NPS absolutely crashed through the floor and kept dropping until September. We saw a massive recovery for B2B from September into October, which, if you remember, is when we were hokey-cokeying in and out of all of the in November, B2B actually increased, whereas we saw a small drop for B2C. And finally, as we moved into the lockdown at the start of this year, both B2C and B2B took a knock, but it's actually B2B that's shown the most resilience during this period. And in fact, the gap between the two has closed to the smallest margin, certainly that I've seen in the past few years. Now, if we look at what customers are saying at those points in time, first of all, we can see in the top left-hand corner, there's a B2B customer there back in March saying that they were disgusted that they hadn't got their order and there'd been no updates whatsoever. And we know in March last year that there was an increasing reliance on online shopping and services, and that happened at exactly the same time that organisations were trying to work out how to make their contact centre and logistic operations COVID secure, which created massive delays right at the point in time when customers didn't want any delays. But if we compare that to the comment in the bottom left-hand corner, we can see a B2B customer who's asked for a payment holiday because their shop's shut. I think it's a water company that they've phoned, actually. So if we put ourselves in the shoes of that customer, they could be a sole trader who doesn't know how they're going to pay their bills. And although business support measures had been announced at this point, we know now that actually it took quite a while for that support to come through. And this person's basically worried that they're going to lose their livelihood. And it's that emotion and that worry that we can see reflected in that B2B NPS score at the beginning of last year. Now, if we fast forward to the start of this year, we can see some very different trends emerging. We're seeing higher customer expectations right across the B2C sector. There's a certain sense from customers that we're through the worst of this, and they're tending to show a lower tolerance for poor service. So you can see the person in the top right-hand corner there is talking about how, you've been working from home for 8 months. That's no excuse for poor service or long wait times. But B2B customers, on the other hand, seem to have a higher level of tolerance with their service providers. And we can see in the bottom right-hand corner somebody talking about how the service was better than 6 months ago and actually they didn't have to wait too long on the phone, which I guess you could read as a sense of relief, or perhaps they've got a greater level of empathy with the people that they're talking to because they've been through something similar to them. Whichever way you look at it, B2B is definitely on the heels of B2C, and I'm really interested to see how that pans out for the rest of this year.
Chris, that's brilliant. Thanks for the great insight into the differences between B2B and B2C over the last 18 months. So we'll move quickly on to voice of customer before we start taking some questions. So in the survey that we did with the CCMA, we talked, and one of the questions was around the propensity of employee engagement survey. So how frequently organisations are asking the staff how they're feeling for a voice of employee programme. What we have seen is that there's an increase of more frequent surveys, with companies having more frequent touch points of 3 months or under. But there's still over half the participants that are only doing surveys every 12 months or even longer in some instances. So look, Gavin, in a remote working world, I know that you'll have some views on this.
Yeah, cheers for that, Rich. I'm finding working with our clients at the moment, they're looking for something more than the traditional annual engagement survey, looking for a more holistic approach to their voice of employee or EX campaigns that they're looking at. And this has only been accelerated by the impacts of the pandemic. They've been presented with employers have just been presented with the complete unknown at times, looking at things sort of like mental health and well-being that's been sort of brought to the forefront. The emergence of remote working and the amount of change that employees are having to sort of deal with and go through has been more prevalent than ever. What we start to do is adopt some of our CX practices into our EX insights to make things a lot more actionable. It's really helped our clients support their people and understand what needs to be done in real time. We've been seeing great results working with clients coming away from that traditional approach where they are just doing that sort of either annual survey or that biannual survey, and starting to develop targeted pulse surveys, action plans and heat maps where there are real areas of concerns, and following things up with sense check surveys to ensure actions are being taken, and really working closely with those HR and operations people to build a sustainability from their voice of employee campaigns. The biggest impact COVID has had is a realization that HR and operational or sales functions need to be more closer to the teams than ever. We've got some research here that shows us some of the details as to why it's so important to be surveying and in touch with your clients as much as possible. So there we go. Thank you very much. So Mind recently did a survey. Mind is one of the leading mental health charities within the UK. It looked at a whole breadth of areas, but the things that really sort of come out was that people aged 24 to 65, 60% of those had been affected by that. They said that they had their mental health affected during the pandemic, and that jumps up even higher for 16 to 24-year-olds, where it's 68%. And only 1 in 4 people who tried to access mental health support were able to do so throughout the pandemic. With the emergence of things such as the return to office, new ways of working, this is causing a lot of anxiety for employees. And it's really key where we've worked with clients to use sense check surveys to understand some of those concerns and prepare people better to what the new normal will look like. And the importance of engagement is more important than ever. We've seen that thriving cultures, those with a real focus on their people, those that have got a really sound and mature approach to their voice of employee campaigns, they've actually seen quite a small reduction in their engagement scores of only 1% through this. But those in cultures where things aren't thriving particularly well, where there's not a key focus on employee engagement, scores have dropped by as much as 52%. So it's really prevalent at the moment, the impact that COVID is having on some of those cultures where employee isn't at the focus or at the forefront of what people are doing. One of the other things that's come out of this as well is the talk of burnout and tolerance levels. People are now 38% less tolerant than they were before the pandemic. So this is kind of looking at some of the small things that would get on people's nerves, the things that would grind your gears. It might be a systems issue, a process, a procedure. Those might have been quite trivial things, but those elements are getting quite exaggerated now for people. So to have an understanding of some of the real stuff that is really concerning people, causing them more effort, causing more stress is really prevalent, so that we can gain insight on that and let our customers and clients actually take action on that stuff as well. And one of the key things is that burnout was classed as an occupational disease by the World Health Organization. So I know myself, you're just finding your meeting after meeting being put into your diary and the stress levels are increasing. It's really key from a well-being and welfare point of view to get into that view. One of the things that we are seeing, though, that hasn't changed from the pandemic, so on to the next slide, please, is that some of the traditional things that do drive employee engagement, they haven't changed. The stuff around the line manager, the responsibility and the culture. And when we're looking at some of the things that Richard was talking about, where some of that propensity has dropped off with line managers taking the time to do the regular one-to-ones, to do that interaction, where people are talking to individuals around their careers, their development, that stuff is still the stuff that's being predicted as some of the high drivers for voice of employee campaigns. So it's really key where that is being sort of shortfalled or lessened off, that we can create action plans and present some of that data in an objective way for HR functions to build collaborative plans for that sustainability with the functions within the business. One of the additional developments as well is starting to apply some of our natural language models to the verbatim comments that have been left by your employees as well. And what this starts to do is not just give us a score, but also gives us a sense of the feeling by function, by team, by department, around the actual sentiment. So this is very much a hearts and minds piece from HR and people functions that's really important to understand what's the actual feeling and the sentiment that's sitting beneath what people are saying as well while they're going through the pandemic.
Superb. Gavin, that's really useful. So look, hopefully that's been a useful introduction to the session. I think that'd be a good time to start having a look at some of the comments and questions that have come in. Christine, there's probably one that will be a good place for you to start off here. We showed that 64% of operations have NPS as a measure. Is there a better agent measure that could be used?
Yes, definitely. I always cringe slightly when I see people targeting agents on NPS. So NPS is basically a brand measure, and it can be influenced by a whole range of stuff. So it could be policy, process, systems, wait times, a rubbish IVR, all of which is way, way, way out of the control of your agents. And once you start to target people on something that they've got no control over, they're going to get pretty annoyed pretty quickly and just become disengaged with the whole process. The way that we recommend building surveys is almost to take a 3-layer approach. So first of all, you would have your headline measure, which could be NPS, or it could be something similar, like general satisfaction. Then you have questions around your operational measures. So it could be customer effort, it could be FCR, it could be answer time to see if you're talking to your customers as quickly as they want to be talked to. And then crucially, after that, you have your people focused questions. So that could be things like knowledge, ownership, empathy, and importantly, they're the things that agents have the ability to influence. They have control over the customer's perception of their knowledge. They have control over the amount of ownership that they choose to choose to demonstrate. And so they're the things that they should be targeted on. And the beauty of constructing surveys in this way is that you can draw links between NPS and between those people measures. So we've never worked with one organisation where we couldn't find a link or a correlation between the on-the-ground people-focused measures and NPS. And what that means is that you know what levers you need to pull on the contact centre floor in order to send NPS in the right direction. And actually, with one organisation we've worked with, we saw a 26-point increase in NPS in a 3-month period from doing that and that alone, linking NPS to those people measures. So yeah, don't target agents on NPS, target yourselves on NPS, but target your agents on something that they can actually change.
Superb. Thanks, Chris. I suppose just as a quick follow-up to that, I think that the one thing that is key, regardless of the channel that's being used for surveys and whether you're changing question sets, is you've just got that one kind of stream of truth, the one question that remains consistent throughout all of it. So you can always just see if there are any changes with any of the surveys or the conditions that you're working with. You've got that one level to see any performance moves that happen. Ryan, I've probably got a question for you actually in terms of the platform. So obviously we've talked around the changes that have happened within COVID in the last kind of 12, 18 months. How has your platform changed and adapted to meet those needs?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say at CX Index, a lot of our new features are always kind of driven by customer demand. And obviously the unique circumstances over the last 18 months have met that a lot of demand has been around how, first of all, we can keep the workforce more engaged. So we've redoubled our efforts on our gamification module, which kind of helps bring leaderboards, compare performance of people working from home versus in the office. And it's really around, helping employees stay more engaged during a time where they're not able to interact as they would previously have done. And I suppose the other element where we've put a lot of focus and development is actually around bringing our social aspects into the tool as well. So we have a social functionality where we can listen to posts and of comments, etc., online, and kind of bring that insight into your kind of traditional voice of the customer solution as well. So I would say that's really where a lot of our focus has been over the last 18 months.
Brilliant, thanks, Ryan. And I think that another thing that's really useful in the CX platform, CX Index platform, is that you've got the ability to kind of spin up surveys quite quickly for SMS and email. So the fact that you can be quite reactive if there's a certain issue or challenge that could be really not just COVID related, this could be around anything, to get that out to set up, and it's kind of in the empowerment of the client to do that. I think that's really useful to have there. Gavin, we've got a question that just come through around what we see as best practice in terms of kind of the propensity of surveys. So it'd be good to get your views on that.
So from a voice of employee point of view, so you can do the traditional sort of standard sort of annual and biannual employee engagement survey, and that's great. The main thing is, no matter what sort of the sequence is and the frequency, you've got to make it actionable. The best clients that I work with are the ones that follow up and then build upon that. So from a maturity point of view, they're probably ready to then start doing pulse surveys to take action from some of the key areas that have come out of that. But then also building in action plans and working collaboratively with their leaders within the business to start look at how do we start to pitch and deliver the insights back to those operations or those functions, so they can start to understand where the gaps are, build some sustainability and ownership, and then coming back again and following that up again with sense check surveys. The thing you find is that with voice of employee, it's very different to voice of customer. There's no such thing as survey saturation. As long as people within the actual functions of the teams that you're working with start to see action, they will happily respond back to you. The biggest criticism that I have either coming back from employees when we're working with a client that maybe has used somebody before us is that, so what? We've done an employee engagement survey, but we did nothing with it. And that's the key thing. When we're seeing that you've got a real culture where they're bought into a voice of employee and a real EX campaign, their employees will readily come back and tell you when they're seeing action and seeing things that are either are happening or aren't happening. And for me, that we sort of build a bespoke, it's a tailored approach really from a maturity point of view where the client is. But as a minimum for me, employee engagement and at least some pulse surveys thrown in on a quarterly basis as well.
Thanks, Gavin. I suppose just a quick follow-up from myself on that then. So we're seeing that people have started to do surveys more frequently now in certain circumstances. What do you think is going to happen when we return to office in terms of going back to what will be the new normal? Do you think that people revert back to kind of the frequency they were at before? Or do you think that people stick to the new schedule as such?
I think you could. I wouldn't recommend it just because once you've started to build that culture, there becomes an expectancy almost from people. They're almost expectant of a survey. Once you start to say, right, it's almost like you said we did, but sort of maximised and sort of really it shows that from top down and bottom up, everybody's bought into having a really great EX approach. You could revert back. I just don't see why you'd want to, because it's once you start to see that return on investment, you start to feel that link back to engagement. Because once you've got an engaged workforce, we know it links into everything. It links into the service that your people provide. It links into profitability. It links into reducing churn, reduction in sickness and absence. All of those link in, and that's when you can start to really demonstrate and benchmark it by function and department. So you could do. I just don't see why you would, Rich.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Gavin. Paul, somebody just said it's more of a comment, but somebody said that they've actually seen a drop in surveys from a voice of customer perspective, the take-up rate during COVID. Have you got any suggestions around that? How you could help there?
Well, that's quite interesting actually, because I think the general consensus and what we've seen in the data is that there was actually an increase in take-up rate. Certainly on the telephony side, I think it went up a couple of percent. I do wonder whether that's people not having anything else to do in lockdown and they think, well, I will take that survey. But I mean, there can be lots and lots of different reasons why take-up rates can fall. I think what we would always say is match channel for channel. So if someone's calling in, make sure you give them a phone survey back. If they're emailing in, make sure they get an email or a web link survey back. Try and match that channel each time. I'd also say try and get the survey to the customer as soon as possible after the actual interaction. So with web services available, you can do that very, very quickly. You can turn those around in seconds, if not minutes. It's usually possible if you get the right technology in place. And I think the overall, probably what we'd all agree in terms of survey design, is keep it simple and keep it brief. No one wants a 15-question survey that's only supposed to take 2 minutes, but actually takes 10 to fill out. So I think making sure the questions are slick and answer what you need them to answer is a key point as well.
Perfect. Thanks, Paul. There's one that I've got here, is probably, I'll take it because it's I said it. So somebody said that. I said that 80-20 as a measure is a poor measure. Why, and what's a better measure? So for me, 80-20 is a legacy metric, and it doesn't really have a foundation. So it's in place, but what does it actually deliver as a metric? We would actually say 95 in 120, so 95% of calls answered in, 95% of calls answered in 120 seconds is a much better metric and will deliver better service overall. And the reason why we say 120 is that we've got a proven link to customer satisfaction scores. We've seen when we've kind of correlated metadata with customer satisfaction outputs, as soon as you start to go over 120 seconds, then you start to see a drop off in customer satisfaction. So there's some science behind having a metric in place. What we see before 120 seconds is that people are more interested in the resolution, agent engagement, and customer effort. So it's 120 is a much better measure. In terms of kind of looking at one metric in isolation, there's an absolute danger in doing that. For me, a balanced view would be better. So looking at kind of a holistic view, maybe average speed of answer, the 120 seconds measure, and then maybe abandonment rates as well will give you a much better balanced view. But it's probably worth pointing out as well, you should do your own research. So 120 is the average that we've seen when we've done it with clients and looked at the metadata. Absolutely, you should do that with your own customer satisfaction, understand what your customers' breaking points are and the tolerance levels, and then build your KPIs around that research. So if we go on to, again, it's another comment, not so much a question, but one that I know that you'll be passionate about, Chris. It says, resource has been taken away from our voice of customer program, which is very frustrating.
Classic. It's not actually that uncommon, especially at the moment when businesses are looking to save money wherever they can. Often the first place that they look will be the CX program, because the benefits of a CX program almost tend to be hidden from the rest of the business if you don't know where to look, but actually it can drive a massive increase in customer advocacy if you do it right. So if I were you, whoever you are, I'd be looking for a quick and easy way to demonstrate the value of your CX program. So I'd probably start with closing the loop with the customer. So quick story, one of our colleagues actually did an experiment where him and his family filled in every survey that they could over the course of the week, and they all said that the service was terrible and I demand a call back. And in total they filled in around 40 something surveys, and the only place that actually got back to him was his local pizza place. And they were mortified that he was so upset, and he had to come clean and tell them that the pizza was actually delicious and it was on time, but he's doing this experiment. So the point I'm trying to make is that when customers complete a survey, quite often they don't expect anyone to actually read their feedback, let alone do anything about it. And that's the turning point for a lot of customers to go from being a detractor to a brand advocate. And we all know what word of mouth can do in terms of brand advocacy. So if you can find the time somewhere, even to call back a small number of customers, talk to them, address their feedback, fix their issue, but crucially, ask them how they'd rate you after you've actually done that. And hopefully they'll say, well, I was a detractor, but now I'm a promoter. My score's moving up to a 9 or a 10 or whatever it may be. And you should be able to then demonstrate the value of that activity in terms of customer advocacy to the rest of the business, and start building the business case that you need to bring your CX program back into life.
Thank you very much, Chris. Ryan, there's one that I think could be quite good for you to pick up. It's saying that somebody asked, how do you bring social media into a voice of customer program?
Okay. As Paul mentioned previously, any voice to customer program really needs to be truly omni-channel. So this doesn't just mean listening to your customers through the traditional survey methods. It also is about listening to unstructured feedback across key social channels. So you need to be able to have a platform that can act as a listening post to those. We do sentiment analysis of those, and then we can start understanding what your customers are saying about you on those channels. So the ultimate goal really here is to improve the customer experience by understanding that insight on both the social side and also the survey side, and bringing that all into one unified application.
Thank you very much, Ryan. So I've got a question for you all, actually. So what would you say is kind of the biggest own goal that you've seen organisations make during COVID? Chris, you can start us off.
What a question. So I would probably say the biggest and most fundamental mistake that quite a number of organisations made was to limit the contact channels through which their customers could contact them. So right at the point when the world was in chaos and no one knew what was going on, and no one had any control over everything at the beginning of last year, that's when some organisations decided to shut their phone lines, which is exactly what you want as a consumer or a business that is reliant on a product or a service. You want to know that the people that you do business with, your retailers, your utilities, your telcos, whoever it is, that they're going to be able to help you out and that they're going to be there for you. But some organisations didn't actually do that. Like I say, they closed their phone lines, and we saw a hit in people's customer metrics. You could tell that it didn't go down well.
Okay.
Thanks, Christine, I've got to say, on a personal level, I had that experience myself as a consumer with a large travel company. I won't name them, but they're out there somewhere. And my loyalty lies elsewhere now. I will boycott that company because they switched their phone lines off and routed everyone through to the website. I'd have waited 2 hours just to have a chat with someone about my issue. So
yeah, definitely.
I agree.
I think for me, from a VOE point of view, basically, the client I was dealing with just stopped speaking to their employees, making massive sweeping changes to remote working, resources, that you name it. So we've all been on the receiving end of it through this pandemic. Not checking in with their people to see what the impact's been, what's happening, and then fundamentally changing their entire management approach to something that's just very transactional, stopping all of the value add stuff, all the stuff we know that sort of the drivers and the real stuff that adds to sort of the predictors for high EX. They just stop doing all that. They become very transactional, very sort of wham bam, let's just pure panic stations get through this. And when they then come back to do engagement surveys at a later point, and took a hit surprisingly. And it's sort of, well, you can sort of, we were trying to tell them, but they just sort of caught in the grip, I think, of everything that was going on, and just got tunnel vision and just forgot about the people, which is the important thing.
From me, I would say what Christine kind of mentioned earlier around closing the loop on negative feedback. So, we've seen an increase in negative feedback because, lack of resource within companies to be able to handle interactions, handle the demand coming in. But I suppose if somebody's taken the time to, leave a negative, negative feedback with comments, with, really useful data, having some kind of contact process to follow up and and sprint to that customer to handle that demand. We've seen, some companies, whether it be lack of resource, but not actually having an outbound contact strategy to reach out and close the loop on those customers. It's probably the main thing I've seen.
Brilliant. Thanks all. We're coming short on time. Let's try and get a couple more questions in. Somebody's asked around what our thoughts are for the drivers behind absence levels decreasing. Chris, can you pick this one?
Yeah, sure. So I've worked from home for about 5 years now, I think, and I'm not going to start boasting about my exemplary attendance rate, Rich, I'm sure you'll agree. But I know the flexibility you get working from home. You don't have a commute. You can do errands straight before or straight after work. And that's going to be exactly the same for everyone. We saw those newspaper and magazine clippings before talking about a general decrease in UK absence rates. So contact agents who traditionally haven't had the opportunity to work from home and may have considered taking a day off for whatever reason, I've got that increased flexibility now and may not have done that while they were working from home. And you mentioned as well, Rich, we should bear in mind that absence rate dropped during a pandemic, which by definition is when lots and lots of people are sick. So if we had data to account for the COVID-related absences, I think that number would be even bigger. We'd have seen a bigger drop in absence rates, really. And we don't have any data to substantiate that at the moment, but I am 99% sure that's true.
Thanks, Chris. One last one, and I'll pick it up. Somebody's asked around, do we have any attrition data? And the answer is we don't have any data around attrition levels. So coming in at the moment, we will have some shortly. What we do know, just through anecdotally spending time with clients and benchmarking exercises that we do, is that there was very little in terms of attrition, people moving organisations or moving into new roles during COVID. And I think this seems to have continued whilst the economy is returning to some sort of normality. I think that the next 12 months are going to be key in terms of attrition levels, how employees have treated their staff, how they've helped them with remote working, how they've been able to retain the social aspect of work to a certain extent, keeping the team ethos while they've been remote working, I think is going to be key. But I think probably the biggest factor that's going to impact retention is around kind of the return to office policies and plans that organisations have. We know that contact centre agents can be quite transient in the way that they are. If you've got a choice of one job, which is working for 1 or 2 days in an office and the rest of it, also 1 or 2 days at home, 1 or 2 days in the office, or whatever split it is, contact centre agents would choose the one that gives them the most flexibility. So organisations that do return back to a fully office environment, I think they'll find it difficult to retain staff if there are competitive alternatives that have a more flexible offering moving forward. So look, very conscious of time now, so I think we should probably draw this to a close. Look, I hope that you found this session useful. And look, we know kind of anecdotally and through raw data that KPIs are absolutely key in terms of benchmarking and comparing yourself against other organisations, and this has become more valuable than ever during COVID to help understand whether the changes in quality efficiency metrics are in line with what the industry trends are and learning from best practice. In terms of voice of customer, utilising a good voice of customer program to understand where customer frustrations are, disengagements is evident. That's absolutely key. Mapping this against customer journeys, using text analytics and sentiment analytics will really help unearth the pain points so you can make improvements where needed and meet customers' expectations in a changing environment. For me, the most important insight, though, is going to be coming from voice of employee at the moment. Employees have gone and will continue to go through huge amounts of change. Understanding their engagement levels and their needs has such an importance at the moment, more so than ever. I can't stress enough the need to speak to your staff for engagement programs on a regular basis. Look, insights are absolutely key to making good business decisions, and I hope this session has been useful in terms of understanding how COVID has impacted core KPIs, voice of customer and voice of employee. So thanks to Chris, Gavin, Ryan and Paul for taking part. Please all go to the CXNow website to catch up on any previous sessions that have taken place. Have been really useful, and also look for the sessions that are coming in the next week or two. Many thanks for your time today.